Our speaker tonight is Elizabeth Streb. She's been variously called a choreographer, an extreme action dancer, a movement engineer, and certainly a daredevil. She creates gravity-defying productions that combine dance, extreme sports, and Hollywood stunt work. Her choreographer requires each performer to test his or her physical and mental limits. There is risk involved for the performers, and a rush of adrenaline is guaranteed for the audience. Those audiences are worldwide, but those of us in New York are fortunate because we can sit in on the open rehearsals at her studio. Her studio is in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. There, in a former mustard warehouse, she created the Streb Lab for Action Mechanics, or SLAM, in 2003. Streb has been recognized for her work with the Guggenheim Fellowship, a Bessie Award, and over 20 years of ongoing support from the National Endowment for the Arts. In 1997, she received a MacArthur Genius Award. She has been a special scholar at New York University, where she got a master's degree recently in time and space, a combination of physics, philosophy, and architecture. Tonight you'll hear how she tries to defy the laws of nature, the laws of gravity. Elizabeth Streb.
Hi, everyone. So I want to start by saying, turn your cell phones back on. Because we're in a Wikipedia world, and what I'd really love is for you to tweet and Facebook and tell everyone what's going on, and any moment in the presentation when you're thinking, oh, I've heard that before, just go on your phone and, talk to people out there about what you're doing. And you can even criticize this. And I think it'll be a beautiful juxtaposition. I won't even take it personally because I won't know. But we've been doing this in our shows. We go to theaters mostly all over the United States. We're a real United States company. We're called now Streb, for all of those of you who don't know, which at this point is still the majority of people on Earth. It's called Streb Extreme Action. And anytime we're in a proscenium house, there's always either a curtain talk or a loudspeaker that comes on and says, turn off your media devices, please be quiet, don't talk during the show. And we're the opposite. We're like, turn on your media devices. We are mostly virally known since we moved into SLAM in 2003. And so we don't even advertise for our shows, which are going on right now. Did you know they were going on right now?
Yes.
Some of you did, right? But since we don't advertise, you might not know, which I think is an interesting quirk. But who does know is everyone who comes. And then they, on their phones, tell everyone they know, if they like what they see, to come on over. And we think this is a more vertical, more vibrant way to let people who might be interested know about what's going on. So it's rather than a top-down, like you must go to Lincoln Center or the Met, it's a bottom-up. Oh, you're not going to believe this, what I just saw. So anyway, here we go.
Rolling high in mighty traps, a house with fire on flaming roads, using ideas as my map.
I'd first like to start by saying I'm very, very honored to be in this hall tonight. I know how many shoulders I'm standing on, and it's a huge honor. I can feel the energy in the room. And I also want to point out that song probably clues you in to my generation, just a little bit. My girlfriend, Laura Flanders, and I were driving up to the country a couple weeks ago, and I was trying to stay awake, and so I put my iPod on, and she was like, I cannot believe you use that music to keep you awake. And I was actually walking around recently, remembering that she heard I usually will not reveal what songs I have on my iPod, because usually I don't listen to music, because I think music's a true enemy of dance. But I felt a wave of embarrassment that now she knows every song that I have on there. So this is about 1971, 1972, really almost right after the film Easy Rider came out. And I'd had a motorcycle since I was 15. And this is the last motorcycle I had. It's a Honda 350. And I was getting ready to ride it across the United States. Of course, I was heading straight to New Orleans because that was what they did in the Easy Rider movie. It was foolish, actually, because I was on my way to San Francisco. So, and my weakest subject was geography. So, what was so amazing about that trip is that you're out there. I did wear a helmet, but you are out there and you're going across every inch of pavement. And I went, in the end, as I zigzagged around America, and it was my most phenomenal and intense physical experience to this day, I have to say. It ended up being a benchmark for what intensity was. I went 6,000 miles in 30 days on that bike. And I did not drive it back, in case you wanted to know. I started out when I was just a kid, noticing movement and action in machines. And at one point, I had a teacher who said, I was always planning for my future. I don't know why. I got nervous young. I got very nervous very young about, well, what are you going to do with your life? And I grew up in a working class family in Rochester, New York, and they adopted me when I was 2. And in that world, if you were a woman, you had to figure out by 17 what your hairdo was going to be, and then keep that hairdo for your entire life. And you also really mostly, I did not have examples of women that were anything but housewives. We didn't have books or art in the house, really, no music. But my mother took me to art classes, and I started to have my heroes, and the people and the actions that they were willing to do, including my father, who was a mason, and he would work. He worked with stone, and I've even to this day never seen. At the end of every day, he came in just wasted, and they were older when they adopted us, and I just didn't like him very much because I think people, well, maybe you know people who this does not happen to. How many people know people who work for an hourly wage out there? Yeah? Okay. Who?
How many of us are? Are there any other stores?
Yeah, actually there are. Okay, let me rephrase it. How many people are out there who work for an hourly wage at labor, like moving heavy things around, building things? Yeah? Okay. But I would see him walk in, and I would see the results of lifting stone all day long. And somehow it had a very, very amazing imprint on me. And people like Evel Knievel, like Annie Edson Taylor, who went over the Niagara in a barrel, and I think was at least the first female to survive that, would say, this guy crashed more times than he made his jump. But he would say, the problem isn't the takeoff, the trouble's in the landing. And I remember thinking that I think that he's a flyer. I think that what he really did so beautifully was fly. He wanted to be in the air. That was one of the first times, and that's Terry Dean Bartlett, that's Grand Central Terminal, about 1999. That was one of the first times we tried falling from 15, 20 feet. Because we were asking the question amongst ourselves, the dancers and I, well, I know we can fall from 4 feet. Yeah, we can fall from 5 feet. We can land flat, but what happens if you go from 20 feet? Now we're asking the question, what happens if you go from 40 feet? When I was collecting actions that I was obsessed with as a young kid, I noticed, small accidents. I noticed people trying things, fixing things. I noticed people who would have a dream of something and pay attention to it, like the circus performers we went to see. I noticed that no one knew their names. And I started to realize that I wanted to build my life around action. That somehow, some way, I wanted to spend my time making up moves. And early on, I didn't know exactly what that meant because I wasn't a dancer and I didn't take dance class, except for one time when I was 6. And then I really didn't like it because you had to wear pink and tutus and put your hair up. And I was like, I didn't know I was gay at 6, but I knew I didn't want, I knew I felt embarrassed about that. So I did downhill skiing, which ended up being the way I collected information about velocity and impact. And it was the way that with all those forces just searing against your body by going downhill, I started to assess that a real move had to happen with some sort of extreme force around your body, not just the type of skill a dancer uses when they execute their moves.
In 1982, at age 33, he attached 42 weather balloons to a plastic lawn chair, tethered the contraption to his Chevrolet, then sat himself in the chair, untied the ropes, and rose. Not 30 feet, not 40, not 100 as he imagined. Above his girlfriend, his mother, and the family's suburban ranch house, Larry rose 16,000 feet over Los Angeles, with not even a seatbelt on his chair. A few miles out to sea, a startled commuter pilot saw Larry pass his cockpit. An armed rescue helicopter at last towed Larry home, but Larry was already saved. To fly was all he wanted. After Larry landed, his arresting officer asked him why he'd done it. He was curious, said Larry. Besides, a man can't just sit around.
The story behind Larry's jaunt was that he had this idea, this dream, that he was going to do this when he was in Vietnam, and he kept thinking about it and making drawings and wondering what would happen. What he didn't do, since this is a science and arts festival, he did not do his calculations. He was planning to float, pretty low. And what I think is so amazing is, even if you do the calculations, because we at Streb work heuristically as well, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't give you any information about what's going to happen when you launch yourself off an edge or when you attempt to mount a machine, when the Wright brothers were making their airplanes. The only thing that really tells you whether something's going to move correctly or whether you're going to be able to survive it is doing it.
The molasses metaphor captures well some aspects of the Higgs ocean.
There was a quote by Douglas Adams, which was a definition of flying is to throw yourself at the ground and miss. And when I read that in one of his books, I thought, well, could you do that? Could you rob the ground, the floor of its hegemony? I started to notice that, everybody is dancing right side up. Their base of support is only their feet. They're shifting weight from one foot to another, and usually that's helping them to locomote their place in space. But they're accepting the fact that this is the end, this is the bottom. And what would happen if there was some way, whether it was physical or not, if there was some way you could defy the floor and make it go around and away so that you actually ended up having a sphere. So you could do some pure movement.
Introducing this modification.
So having trapped a fly in a mason jar early on, I watched it fly. And usually people think that that's pretty ugly. But I noticed how in the middle of the jar, it shifted directions all by itself. It didn't shift directions by bouncing off the edges of the jar. And I thought, how is it possibly able to do that? And I got jealous, and I got completely obsessed with thinking, well, if a fly can do this, why can't I? I knew the one issue that I would have to be able to contend with is the crash, the impact. And I think even to this day, the one thing Streb's willing to do is not camouflage gravity. I think ballet spends a whole lot of time technically camouflaging gravity, so does modern dance in a certain way. When they're on their way down to the ground, they're not falling, they're getting down. When they have to get up, they actually spend time getting up. And what we always wondered, although some people who may not like what Streb does sees only the crashes. And what I'm really trying to demonstrate is the purity of the flight and the freedom of the flight and the inevitability and the failure of flight when it ends. And it ends not by our will, but because of the nature of the world. There are lots of different experiments that Streb has done over the years. This is actually, we were commissioned by Wolf Trap to honor the Wright brothers in 2004. And this is actually the sands that they did their experiments on. And they allowed us every day to go there. They had a whole film crew that was exceptional. And these are the dunes. And we were trying to figure out, I wanted to figure out to pay homage to their first successful flight, albeit it was only 12 seconds. I wanted to see, can a human stay in the air for that long? Is there any way that can happen? Can you jump off a cliff? This is an example of what we did. The videos in the background are the videos they took at Kitty Hawk. And this is called Wild Blue Yonder. As some of you know, that was the Air Force anthem, and that's where Off We Go Into the Wild Blue Yonder came from. This was a celebration of flight, so in the audience, there were all these Tuskegee airmen. And when that song came on, they stood up and put their hands on their chest. And what I realized in my research doing that piece was that most of the advancements in flight were done by the military. And it was just the way it was. And I thought that if I could separate the science from the particular uses that the others put those advancements to, then that's the way it is. I really felt that that was one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard, even though, you know, the sad thing about airplanes is they used it pretty quickly, not to just fly over and look down at the beautiful stuff on the earth, but to drop bombs. A number of years later, this is our current piece, and it's called Run Up Walls. And we developed lots of hardware technicians. Can you see it? Can you kill the house lights for a second? At any rate, it's a 25 by 25 foot wall. And we're in these special harnesses. It's a counterweight system. So there's actually 8 people that are manipulating the 2 you see most clearly. But there's 2 others on the rails, and then there's 4 others on the ground. And what we're trying to figure out is how can you make it look like this is as normative a place as if you were doing these moves on the ground. That's okay. You don't have to turn it down. I just go. And what the conceit is that when you really fly, if all you want to do is just go up and come down, like basically trace your parabolic curve, because that's what you have access to, that would be okay. But rhythmically and dynamically, it's fairly limited. But what we're trying to do is have this space-time merge together in sort of a silly putty kind of way and figure out how to do some moves in perpendicular space that are just not possible on the ground and defy what it seems to be a believable place to be. About, let's see, 10 years ago, I've always believed that this action could be used commercially. I really feel it's an artist's job to figure out on their own, gee, how large is our audience? And my reputation is in the modern dance world, and we've been sort of doing different things. Like we tried out last June for America's Got Talent. They came at us, and we went to LA, and now I can tell you, I had to sign a contract about this thick, swearing secrecy. Little did they know that I really didn't want to tell anyone what I was doing. However, it was the most fascinating thing, because if you win $1 million, number one. And I thought they wanted us to bring, we have this piece that you'll see with cinder blocks that we swing back and forth. And it is the bottom of a circle, and it is true timing. I mean, it's a pendulum, so it doesn't lie the way some people do when they move. Sometimes I think, and I know this is a raspy thought, that the only time people really tell the truth with their movement is when they're scared. Or they encounter a rat in the subway or something like that. So when we were there, there were just in the green room, which is where you are before you go out to compete. There were so many different acts in the green room that I was thinking, how did Streb get here? Oh my gosh, this is going to be a real accident of nature. And when we went out there, first Pierce buzzed us. The other two did not buzz us because I think they were like so shocked at what the heck we were doing with these cinder blocks. Like they just couldn't understand what it was. And we didn't make it past the first cut, which I was extremely upset about. But what they said is they were looking for the next Justin Timberlake. And I was like, I don't know how to take that back to the studio and do anything with it. But about 10 years ago, there were some people uptown interested in maybe making a commercial show out of Streb, and so I got introduced, and this is a big honor for me, to Ken Feld, because I loved the circus my whole life. I thought it is the greatest show on earth. I still think that. And I don't mean Cirque du Soleil. I mean the good old circus with sawdust and animals and everything. So I met Ken Feld. I got to meet him. And he said that he saw the show, but when you're that much of an impresario, he came to Grand Central Terminal, which is where we were rehearsing. It was the weirdest thing. He wandered around. He never looked at what we were doing, because in his mind, he didn't need to. And I'm still pondering what that means. Like, he would never have just stood there and said, I would say, hey, do you want to see this piece with the cinder blocks? And, he would never have said, he said, I can see it, I know what you're doing. And what he said is, you're missing two things. You're missing little people and an elephant. And so this was my solution to that. I actually talked to an elephant trainer about this. He sort of warned me how expensive it was to take care of an elephant. I really should have signed a contract with Ken Feld before I went to all this trouble. Same trampoline we used at Wolf Trap, by the way. Just that one move took 10 months to teach him to get up on the trampoline. I think give him a hand, because that was pretty good. It was either, I had to make a choice, either 8 dancers or 1 elephant. Financially, it just was not going to work. And by the time I had this idea, I had another idea, which is actually in the book, a concept idea about weight, which involves an elephant standing on 4 people. But I just abandoned it because he just kind of disappeared on the project. With my love of circus and format, I started to believe that where action placed itself had to do with the content of the action, not so much what you did, but where you did it and what eyes gazed upon you. This was the Cirque du Soleil asked Streb to come help celebrate their 20th anniversary a few years ago. And they told, I had to dance to this music. I took some of my pieces and I had to slice them down a little. But I was very interested. This was their gift to Montreal. And they essentially had 200,000 people in the street. And they peppered Streb in amongst the other circus acts that they did. Body balancing, Wheel of Death, silks. And what I was wandering around looking at was whether or not, what is the grammar of action? And whether or not the syntax of Streb would merge in the perception of the people gracefully to the syntax and the grammar of the circus act. And as I was wandering around for those hours, watching people's reaction when it switched from circus to Streb, I was expecting them to say, bummer, downtown experimental dance, oh, come on, But they didn't do that. There was no negative reaction to what they were doing. They accepted our activity physically. And what I realized was different about Streb and the circus was that our sentences are slightly longer. That the circus knows when the audience wants to clap, and they'll stop their moves much more often and look out and get a bow or an applause. We insist the audience watches for, sometimes my pieces are short. They're mostly, 5 to 7 minutes. But that's long when you think about action. And maybe I started to be concerned with the thought that what if action is episodic and not durational? And what if the real content of movement was only encased in a move that happened in a split second or a couple seconds? And that when you try to organize movement together, even though we work causally, it loses the essence of its nature. Over the years, we collected lots of questions. My questions were, this is my method. You ask something that's so unquestionably true. The effort is to ask something that's so unquestionably true, it doesn't occur to you to ask it. And I think that I have a new friend. Her name is Lisa Randall. Does anyone know Lisa Randall? Where? Physicist. She's a physicist, yeah, a particle physicist. I think she's at Harvard now, but I think she was at MIT. Oh. You know her, right? Yeah, well, she's a part, but I also think it's interesting. Particle physicists are also studying, the macro world, the cosmology. I thought, well, isn't it hugely different? But she said that I read her book, Warp Passages. I read the part where she said, okay, there's 4 forces, strong and weak nuclear forces, gravity, there's electromagnetism, but why is gravity so much weaker than the others? And Brian, you can tell me if I have this right. So she thought there must be something fishy about gravity. And she corrected the equation and somehow got all of the forces to be equal, and then surmised that it must be that either gravity's leaking out into a parallel universe or it's leaking in from some other parallel universe. Is that true? Fair enough? Yes. But what I'm saying is, how crazy is that? And I think, I look at her and she goes, oh, this will happen and that won't. And I'm like, well, how do you know? In my action, I go, well, how do you know? You're the one that thinks gravity's leaking to a parallel universe. I mean, it's so inspiring because then I think, well, what movement or what set of principles am I not thinking to ask? Because I'm so, ensconced in the cliche-ridden universe that I just physically can't wonder about things that I don't already know about. So some of these lists are quite absurd. of course, because I am a performer, my ultimate quest is to figure out, how do I present on stage in an artificial situation, a heart-stopping aha second of events. Like, can it happen in a second? Will it take 10 seconds? Will a series of things make you just go nuts? And what are those? What is the iambic pentameter of action? What is our version in action of hitting a high C? Is it falling? This is at the ICA in Boston in February, and as this truss rises, people climb and fall and climb and fall. And I think there's something so quintessential about the body falling and about the land. This is a dance I did for my girlfriend's birthday. Essentially, the stories in the book. See how I'm tricking you? Now you have to buy the book to know the story. And this is a song I use. And I thought, it's her 40th birthday, I want to do something extremely special for her. What movement could I do? And I thought of a dance called Blaze Away. And what it was simply is you're on a very long lane. I'm here. My dancers are in the middle, and Laura was there not knowing what I was doing. And there were 100 people at the party. And I walked to this music like this. And right in the middle, my dancers lit this fire that was exactly the size of my torso. And when I got to a certain beat in the song, I crouched down and I flew into a horizontal axe and landed on the fire. And the deal was to put it out. But I'd been rehearsing with Sterno. And when I stood up, this happened. I was on fire. And to this day, I look down, and it's true what they say about that kind of you get mesmerized by them. I've never seen anything that fast. I realized it was fire because it was unbelievably hot, and it was burning through my clothes. And I knew I had a couple seconds to figure out what the heck to do. But in that moment, I felt, and then I figured it out. I didn't figure it out, someone else helped me. But I also no, because I was going like this, and nothing was happening. But I want to let you guys know, if that should ever happen, that you burst into flames, your friends are not going to help you. In fact, my friend Anita right there kept taking pictures. I learned a lot, maybe not so much about motion and elements, but a lot about human nature that day. Another idea of an essentialist act, this is me diving through a pane of glass. And what does action do to substance? That's one of my conundrums in inventing movement. You're looking at the body, it's so body-centric, and I'm trying to figure out how can you make it so extreme that you notice the action. And when you realize that force, unless force gets added in, although the forces are invisible, it's just really not going to be any way to, I don't think, drive down the issue of what really is the content action possibly can hold. And we try to work with actual action magic. So how could we make a simple piece that's true to time and space? And I was watching The Matrix 1, and I thought if I had a 20 by 20 foot frictionless surface, and then I put a cheap camera above and then projected it vertically, I could do some moves that you couldn't do vertically. But could I, like Matrix 1 and unlike Matrix 2 and 3, could I make the audience believe that these were close enough to reality to accept the slight spatial trompe-l'oeil that was going on? And they were supposed to pretend, physically, like wiggling and stuff, that this is how it would feel if you're really trying to float a body down. And what I really, even a position like that, what I really wanted to know was, well, why can't we do that? Like, we're so limited unless you're really piled up correctly. I think it's, well, I don't think it's true with quantum mechanics, because I think they do really zany things on that level of size. There, a picture of America's Got Talent. So I'm not just kidding, it's a true story. There are the cement blocks. So if my part of reality is my curiosity about movement and how can I stage it, in the world of animals and in the world of rodeos and the world of circuses and the world of stunt people and slapstick artists and all of the magic that happens in playgrounds, could I be a collector, very similar to an anthropologist as a collector? Could I figure out how to grab these really beautiful, magical moments, moving moments out of life and put them all together? And could I, without divesting those moments of their unique and moving specialness, can I repeat them and put them on stage and have something happen that is not telling a story, but similar to telling a story? That's a surfer with a shark that I don't think he planned. This is a piece we do, speaking of danger, which is a big part of the type of conditions we set up, and we do that to get out of our habitual place and space. We do that to understand how you can contend with space that in a way that is not just volitional, that really is artificial. Can a building, this is a steel I-beam, it's on a cable, it's not going to go anywhere. But when I decided to make an 8-foot I-beam and I cut it, all of a sudden what you really have is blade. And the dancers, actually we had 3 cement blocks in a row and with different size radii and swung them. And that ended up being a much more complex rhythmic timing and non-predictive timing than this. The audience thinks this is, like I see people in the audience and they just go like, they don't want to look at it, they can't bear it. But because the dancers know that it's a circle it's doing and it's changing its height and that's it, and it's 8 feet wide, they know how to cheat the seconds and get out of the way just at the last possible minute. And in that moment, that last possible minute moment, I'm asking questions about the drama of action and the story that it tells. Well, you saw at America's Got Talent, I just had 2 cement blocks. This is at the ICA, I have 3 cement blocks. I thought that would make it more challenging. You can see we have a screen that's showing the overhead projection of this, and it also has the action tracks that the dancers are covering. And so we're really presenting the physical issues of horizontal with the vertical and saying that that conjugates the watching of human action in a dimensional way, since the proscenium in theaters completely deadens it. We try to figure out how to harness an individual force and use its uniqueness to do moves we couldn't do without it. We look out into the world, like bull riding, that 8 seconds of hell is one of my most esteemed activities. I mean, I've never done it, but I watched this cowboy. He's on a bull called Bodacious, who is very famous for never letting anyone, only 6% of the people who rode him stayed on. But what kind of turbulence would that be? And could we basically handle that action? And you look at the stands. What do you think? There's like 80,000 people watching this? I don't know. I think that says something about movement in modern dance. So we examine weather systems. We examine sports. We examine how far is the human really willing and able to go. This is called breakthrough. This is called ricochet, and this is at our slam lab with kids. We work with about 300 or 400 kids a week. And we try and figure out what makes sense to them. You know, rather than an adult trained audience, I value not just are they watching, but I value if you can keep the attention of, and a lot of these kids we work with are kids that are supposed to have attention deficit disorder, and they're supposed to, you know, and really what we think it is that they don't have any more physical ed in the schools or arts in the schools. So the kids are just going nuts because they really should be flying all around the place like that. And then the parents that bring their kids about, you know, I told you how many, to slam every week, they're like, it's so fantastic when they go home, they're tired. And I work with a mathematician, his name is Barry Cipra, and he helps me figure out these equations and what they signify, depending on what we're doing. And then we invent physical enhancement devices, and we think our action gizmo machines are very similar to what the music industry did in the Middle Ages with their harpsichord and their flute, and certainly on and on and on. And we don't think that we could express everything humanly possible to express with physicality without our machines. We couldn't get as high in space, couldn't go as fast, we couldn't figure out with those forces how to do some moves that maybe no one's ever done before. I mean, the big problem is, how do you notice the moves that you're doing? Like, if an audience can't tabulate naming devices, like if you don't have a body of knowledge with names attached to it, then rather than descriptive or referential or musical, then you're not really maybe even ever going to be able to perceive motion. We have a turning machine. This is looking under the machine. And so our floors that we perform on always turn. We've studied what's perfect radius for a human run. This is the golden mean, as all of you know. We've wondered, you know, this is the spatial harmonic, human harmonic size graph of Le Corbusier, and I've wondered, well, with a body this size, the floor, if there's 8 of them, the floor, in my heuristic opinion, should be 20 by 20, and that way, the action that those size people do on Earth affect the space in a primarily physical way. We're asking, what is the body grammar? What is the nature of syntax when you reduce it down to the joints and the function of the shoulders and the function of the knees? Is there a way to understand that this could provide a language that's not just calibrated to music, but that has to do really with the essence of what the body is capable of, and not just the execution of the moves, but what the execution of those moves might signify. This is how I choreograph, I draw. Most of my drawings, when I go in to tell the dancers what to do on the machines that we have, they're so embedded in kind of an emergency situation, they really don't pay much attention to me anymore. And I've even taken to going into the studio once I design this format. Okay, this will be a wheel, this will be a turning floor, you know, this will be a gizmo. I still do drawings, but a lot of times I just feel like more as if I'm a stenographer. And then I attach the order of the events together. This is called Gizmo. That's in our garage also. And if you came on the weekends, the next 5 weekends, and you came on a Saturday night, we allow you to get on the Gizmo. What do you think? Who wants to? Yes! It's called Slam Inclusive. So after the show, if you pay an extra $5, you can come and do a trapeze, trampoline, pop action, which is the groundwork, that's the rougher work. Or if you know, you're friendly with me, I'll take you back to this. Not everybody can get on this because it produces forces that are a little anarctic. And Noe Espana, Nirvana Espana, the same people who designed our flying trapeze, designed and built this. I said to him when he brought it in about a year ago, how fast can you go in this thing? Because I was imagining it would be kind of slow because it's a couple tons of metal. He said, it can go faster than you can keep up with it. And of course, I sat down and mulled that over and I thought, well, what does that mean? And what that means is if you cross that line, you can't slow it down. And what the dancers have done is get faster and faster and faster on it and have condensed the moves that are capable of happening on it more and more and more to find what the real rhythm might be. And then finally, I think it is an artist's duty and kind of a civic responsibility to figure out, well, where and who is going to care about this and where should it be placed. And I wonder how all the young people in this audience and the Pierce tattooed people, where do they go? I just don't see them at Lincoln Center or at the Met or at the Symphony Hall all the time. I know they go there. But what I'm interested in is how are people going to gather in the next couple of decades? And we tried to ask what we had made that anyone would care about. And I got the opportunity with NPR and Studio 360 to send Obama a 1-minute phone message about some suggestions I might have had.
Hi, Brock. This is Elizabeth Streb. I'm an extreme action choreographer in New York City and wanted to weigh in on the easiest, cheapest way to change our world. We choreographers who stock and trade on invisible things, i.e. movement, have an extremely affordable plan to establish the bedrock of your platform for governance. I know you need to fix the economy and/or create new jobs and improve education and health. If you establish movement as a holy elixir for our daily lives, I predict all above would come to pass. Movement is a panacea we've all been searching for. Not a movement, but doing movement. Action as subject. Here's the plan laid out simply. I.e., every morning, before coffee, all 300 million people in the USA would jump up and down 3 times, then do a full 360 turn in the air, and snap into a huge X with their body vertically. If you inaugurate this movement policy, I predict wars will end, sadnesses will cease, and the need for Ritalin will disappear. Congratulations, and call if you need more information. Thanks for your leadership. Elizabeth Streb.
He actually hasn't called me yet. So, are there any questions? This is Slam. I'll just let that float by.
Hi. Aside from fearlessness, what do you look for in your dancers?
Well, physically, we look for a completely constitutionally impervious body. So, for instance, you can't have a chronic joint problem, which, most people do have, either the neck or the back or the knees. You have to have just, you have to be that kind of a stalwart physical animal. And then your relationship to fear in our 3-day audition gets well analyzed. It's not that we endanger anyone, but we can tell who would fail before the final jump or who would bail out. And we have a graceful method to figure out the fight and the flight response of the human. And also, are they a team? Because we have 8 people protecting each other, and those 8 people have to stay on deck no matter what happens to make sure everyone's okay. So they have to be good team players. There can't be any prima donnas. They have to enjoy hard work. That's not that common, I found, but it's a very hard technique. And it has to be something, then finally, that you are completely curious about. They're action methodologists. They're almost engineers. If I'm the architect, they're the engineers. And so their solving of the methods for how to contend with these forces and these pieces of equipment has to be very astute. And we all work together to figure that out. And I guess that's it. Sometimes we're sometimes wrong when we pick someone, but mostly we're pretty accurate. Yeah, sure.
Without giving away any trade secrets, if you have them, how do the dancers train so that they're not injured when they fall horizontally?
When they slam down?
Yeah, when
like
they slam down.
That's depending on how high they're coming from. We start low like this, and then you flail out your body, and you have to figure out how to organize it really rapidly in a perfect horizontal line. That's one thing. The other thing is the alignment vertically and balletically is your feet, your knees, your hips, your short stomach, your shoulders, and your ears. That has to be lined up, and it's much easier to line it up like this, I think, than to switch it horizontally. Because you could arch, and if you land arched, that is not good. So they have to figure out how to organize the alignment horizontally, and we do it very incrementally. You can see when someone first climbs up on a height, I can tell if their teeth are chattering or if their throat goes dry. I can see that. And then I go, why don't you not do it today? Maybe tomorrow. We'll do that. You never can say, I won't do it. But you can say, maybe tomorrow, or maybe the next day. And then very gradually, they are able to contend with the heights. In terms of the injuries, we agree to get hurt when we walk in the room. You are going to get hurt. And our job is to make it not a mortal wound. And we do everything we can not to have that happen. But almost, I would say, always, when a bad injury has happened, and it's only been a couple times, it's been that fight or flight thing. And that last half second, they made the wrong decision. Mm-hmm. It's my fault, however, because I'm responsible for these bodies. Because almost always I notice earlier in the years of their tenure that was going on. And it's just very hard to walk up to someone and say, you got to go, when everything else is okay about their performance. But I've learned to have to do that, so that's...
So if you could choreograph something for the astronauts in the space shuttle, what might you do? Which, of course, raises another question. Have you thought of doing things underwater?
Right. Well, first, the space shuttle, which they're both anti-gravity machines, right? I haven't thought of doing that because I think I would have, one, I don't like slow motion. And I don't care for adagios, and I know it would have to be an adagio. And I think it would be probably one of the only true adagios that exist in the world, because you have to go slow in those two locales. And I think mostly when people are like doing their moves and they'll say, oh, I think I'll make this a slow move. It always annoys me because I don't know why they're making it a slow move. But without gravity and without, as weak as it is, and without the dramatic result of the hit, I'm not sure I could create a rhythm that I would be able to show difference within, so that it could have, and I haven't named the rhythms that we've created, but I think that if it were all that even, I don't have an idea yet for what that would be like. However, we honored an aviator, Cheryl Stearns, last year at our Action Gala. This year we're honoring Trisha Brown on May 6th, if you want to come and honor her with us. But she had the record for the most dives out of an airplane, parachute jumps in a 124-hour period of any female. And we're putting all of our Action, Maverick, equipment, people's things in SLAM. It's a new program. So Philippe Petit is going to have a tightrope wire. They're opening May 6th. Hugh Herr, who's, I think he's head of the Biomegatronics lab at MIT. He's a former climber. He's a climber. He's going to have a rock wall. And Cheryl Stearns wanted to put a wind tunnel on the roof. And here you have to have a 300 horsepower jet engine but that, now it's not underwater or in space, but it's this channel, this cone, and you'd be able to fly with this wind coming at you. She said, yeah, but it'll also slam you against the walls at 60 miles an hour, so you got to kind of practice it, but That I'd be interested in, the wind thing, but it's not the thing.
Hi, there's an elite group of Filipino kalisilat stick fighters called the Dog Brothers, and their motto is higher consciousness through harder hitting. I was wondering, being a neuroscientist, do your dancers or yourself have an interest in attaining a particular state of mind, or is it just the accomplishment after the fact? I'd be interested in the psychology behind what people are trying to attain besides the physical attributes.
What is their motto?
Higher consciousness through harder hitting.
It's so cool. That is about the coolest sentence I've ever heard. I got totally lost on the sentence. Are you saying that what is our experience, or what do we think we accomplish when we hit hard?
Yes,
like that?
in particular, I can understand all the physical things would want to accomplish, but is there a state of mind that you know any of your dancers are trying to achieve?
I'm not sure. I don't know about them. I can only probably speak about me. I don't think that we're using it to rise out of our earthly mentality. It does that automatically anyway. And that's why I think they don't clean up before they leave. Like we've tried for 20 years to say, because they really are in another place in their psyche after one of these pieces. The forces have hit them, or they've hit the ground, and they are not their normalized self once all the chemicals settle back to the bottom. To quantify that, I think it's just more perceptual on my part. And I think that we think of the rite of scarification, and we're proud of our injuries. We're proud of what happens that we escape. We're proud of, I can see that some of my dancers hit harder than others. And I just think, well, how hard could a human hit? I think, like, how much further could we go? But I think that's an unbelievably fascinating question. And one time a neuroscientist said to us that we do these moves where we fall completely back. I won't do it here because it's upsetting. But they said you're not supposed to, even in judo and martial arts, you do a roll, or they said that's not supposed to be very good for you, And I'd be really curious about what's really going on in there. So, all I know now is that I have the best bone density of anyone that's 60.
Answered my question. I was going to say, in Aikido, we're taught to just kind of roll and not just meet the ground like antagonistically, but more of like a circular movement. And I was going to ask you, what was the philosophy or the reasoning behind making it more of an impact, making it less efficient?
Right. I think that we think of pop action as a present tense technique. So I don't really look into the future that far. I just sort of get an idea. And when I first got the idea, because I saw a piece of plywood fall backwards, and it just landed, I thought, oh, that's a large surface area. It landed like a waft. It weighs about 70 pounds. And I thought, I bet I could do that if I could just make myself stay straight on the way down. And that's actually psychologically the hardest thing to do, to stay in alignment. Because if you curl or something, then you really whack yourself pretty badly. But I thought that it was, and it's, again, collecting aesthetic decisions. I think that when you roll, you're faking it a little. I mean, that's what dancers do. They come down. This is a pointed foot. Mm-hmm. They come down, meet the ground. Their knees are straight. Their hips are not distended. They go through their foot till their heel gets on the ground. Still the knee is straight. Then they plie. It still does not go into the hip. And that's how they absorb from their grand jetés, they absorb the impact. I think it's more interesting to just land flat. And it is just an aesthetic choice.
A second question, you've mentioned it before. So what is a definition of a true movement? What is a definition of something that's not a lie?
That's a great question, too, because I'm in the midst of my inquiry, and it's gone on for 30 years. I don't have a perfect answer. I have some ways of telling if something's not, or if something is, I have a couple ways of telling. One, if it is a real move, you'll get hurt trying to stop it. I know that. I know that it's not a real move if you don't have both feet off the ground, because you're not really moving because you don't have to. And there's no emergency situation occurring. A real move has to do with being itself. I suspect it has to be extreme. I think that it is itself because it's not mimicking or miming, a broken heart or something that happened in the Second World War, or it's really being itself. It's about this set of action rhythms. It's telling its own physical story. And maybe it would remind you of your mother's perfume. Maybe these memories are, embedded in our bones and our cells, and it happened to you, going down a hill or bumping into a tree with your sled. And what I'm trying to do is get at, how to usurp those memories that are primarily physical and not tabulated because there's no real nomenclature for physicality, really. That's what I know so far. Hey, I want to thank you all for coming out to see me, and I hope you come to SLAM. It's streb.org, and we have popcorn. And I really, really appreciated talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.